I'm also going to do a screen share. And then I will just go through the basics of what we're going to be doing. Like I said, I will begin by getting us centered with the meditation that I started with. We're going to cover this topic. Really, I've been touching on each subject once a month for the past, 7 months. This is the 7th one in this series. And it's really my picture of some of the elements. It doesn't have to be in order. It doesn't necessarily have to be these only, right? These are just ideas of how we can really, come into who we've, incarnated to be, and to start living toward that purposeful life that we probably had a contract pre-birth that we wanted to fulfill. All right, so I'm sorry about let's go to, there we go. So this Rise series is helping to support you in aligning with your soul purpose. And in each of the classes, I'm offering them free on the 4th Monday of each month. In December, it'll be the 3rd Monday. And we will explore one key element, including and I will offer in their insights about your inherent gifts and purpose, guidelines for coming back into alignment, and tools to implement during your spiritual unfoldment. As I said at the beginning, I do record these and I put them up on my website. I've included, and I will include again, the link in the chat. I know that if you come in after somebody's put a chat, it doesn't show, so I will include it again. And basically, you can go back and watch any of the ones you missed. If you are calling in by phone, I think everybody's here on Zoom, but basically you can push *6 to be muted or unmute yourself, and *9 to raise your hand. And my name is Veronica Lee. I am a metaphysical teacher. I have been not necessarily studied formally in terms of metaphysical schooling, but it was my upbringing. So in other words, from the time I was really little, my mom started bringing me to her guru, or, family psychic, whatever you want to call it, where I learned all kinds of practices from, putting my hands on people, holding them over, energy work, to practicing our intuitive skills and meditation, visualization. That was all part of my upbringing. I was taught from the time I was little also that we do create our reality. And that was a little daunting for a child, because I thought, oh, I've really messed this world up. There was a lot I saw going on and I thought I caused it all. And so through practice, through my own spiritual practice, I've come to understand these deeper mystical notions, rather than more theoretical, or what felt to me a little bit dogma-like growing up, and felt a little bit daunting to try to apply to my life. As my mom taught me, we are all intuitive. And so, yes, we are all naturally intuitive. And for me, I just was able to start practicing at a really young age. I have been working in the Akashic Records with clients for 17 years. I've been teaching people how to access their records for 15 years and offering mentoring to them, whether it's one-on-one or in groups and such. I also have been writing for Om Times magazine since about 2012. And I really am, the focus that I bring is to empower others. That is so what I am here to hold space for. So that being said, that if there's anything that doesn't resonate, basically take what you like, leave the rest. It doesn't have to be anything in particular that that makes throwing out the baby with the bathwater. In other words, if it resonates, great, and if it doesn't, no worries, because you're basically your own navigator, and I'm just offering little pebbles along the way that you may or may not resonate with. I am a mother of 4 young adults who are off doing life, and one did move back home, and I have been widowed since 2018. Actually, yesterday was the 4-year anniversary of losing my husband, and we have moved into a whole new pattern, my children and I. And with that, let's go into this rise. So these are 12 key elements. I actually gave this talk originally in 2017. It was at one of the healing arts festivals that I was at, and saw a pattern and saw a picture in how working with my clients and how we are trying to move from being where we are in our everyday lives into where we really want to be, right? In terms of both soul purpose, not just the things we want or how we want to express ourselves, but to really come in to fulfill those soul contracts and to fulfill our purpose for why we've incarnated. And those are, and I'll go through the first 6 briefly and just name them all, and you can see them here, but we're going to cover number 7. So again, I do have this on my website that you can go back and look and include that. Let me just keep letting people in. So the first is recognize your true self. And of course, that can mean something, very esoteric. It could also be, very simplistic, whichever way you want to feel into it. Remember your purpose. And as I see your purpose, it's really about, staying connected to what you've agreed to do, what you wanted to experience for this life, but also to just really experience being human and living in joy. Renew your commitment. So in other words, just because you've sort of gotten to that aha place, like, oh my gosh, I'm a soul, amazing being that has come in to support our, collective awakening. It's not going to just suddenly happen and things are going to fall into place. You have to really renew that commitment. Like, I am going to, walk this path that I've come in to do. And then to instigate change, to start to make your way down that path. You want to illuminate your intentions, and it is helpful if you implement your intuition. Today, we're going to talk about separate from unsupportive patterns, seek support, surround self, show up and step out, embody and empower, evolve consciousness, and enjoy life in being you. And as you can see, I just created this acronym with 3 R's, 3 I's, 3 S's, and 3 E's. So because this process of really stepping into ourselves is a longer process. It's not like, hey, this is just going to happen if I just do X, Y, and Z. And how I see it, it's not even linear. It's very much a spiral. We come around, we have this aha moment, and then we, come around it again. And it's like, okay, why am I back where I started? You're not. You've come to the next level of consciousness around that particular thing, but it's definitely more matured. All right. So key element number 7, separate from unsupportive patterns. And as I said, this is one that I find to be probably one of the toughest. It is, we've come in many times into family systems and with situations that are so part of who we believe we are. And yet sometimes they were only meant to be our starting point. And obviously we are to grow. And sometimes growing means leaving those environments, leaving that family of origin. I'm not suggesting that you should. I'm just saying that for some people, it can mean these drastic changes. And it's not in terms of, shame or you're better than anybody else. This is really about you coming into who you've come to be, you really owning that and learning across, many different experiences, what that means. And in so doing, it sort of starts to become a process of clearing out things that aren't you, right? Oftentimes we may not know what we do want, but we know what we don't want. But when it comes to the patterns that aren't supporting us, it can be a really tricky thing to discern. And, at the beginning, when we were just casually talking, it was, yes, not just separating from those unsupportive patterns, but recognizing what those may be. So here we're going to go into the big stuff. That can include people. So I'm going to go back to that family of origin thing. Again, no judgment. This is just pictures. For me, I really wanted family. Family meant everything to me. And so my mom's family of origin was really messed up, and she didn't want anything to do with her mother. But, obviously I would be like, grandma has to come to my birthday, things like that. And what's interesting is that this was so important to me growing up, and yet my whole family is sort of scattered to the wind through all kinds of dysfunction, through all kinds of chaos, through all kinds of pain and suffering. And it's something that I couldn't even try to hone in. I couldn't even try to pull it all together, right? So sometimes it simply happens, and sometimes life happens to us in ways that can feel really, like, oh, this is too much. Or we can start to see it as that life is happening for us, as painful as it may be. And there are those places in which separating from unsupportive patterns, those people, let's say, is sticky, because maybe it's, the spouse that you have children with, and it's like, how do I separate from this person, but I still have to have my children see them? Or maybe it's a job that you really love and need, but there's a toxic person that you can't fire or do anything about, right? Because they're somebody you have to work with, let's say. So those are the trickiest situations when it comes to the people. And yet there are ways to start to recognize it's not just whether or not that person's in our life, it's where are we hooked in energetically. So I just want to clarify that before we go on. Does anybody have any questions around the difference between the actual person and this hooking in energetically? Because I'm going to go deeper into that, but I just want to make sure we're all sort of on the same page, and that that's making sense. So is that good? I'll go back to the screen for just a moment. Okay, so yes, so basically this energy piece is, some people will call it relationship cords, others can call it, energy, or sometimes they'll refer to other people as, let's say, energy vampires. We don't necessarily want that. We don't necessarily want anybody who has a sense, we don't want to start to set up people as labels. Let's say, I'm going to use some labels because then it gives us a frame of reference, but we don't really want to have a sense of that they are energy vampires and they are bad, or they, right? But we can energetically feel when somebody's energy kind of pulls on us, and we can recognize this isn't comfortable. This isn't working for me. This is causing anxiety in me. I'm stressed about, whatever, right? And we can start to take responsibility to where we might be sort of playing into that or somehow participating in that. But at the same time, we don't want it to become where we start to turn ourselves into victims. So I just want to clarify the subtleties around that. Is that making sense so far? I'm going to go ahead and go back to the other screen. And you can always take a screenshot of these, and like I said, I'm recording them. And so you will be able to see, rewatch this. So with the people, one of the things we want to do is start to look at our own system, our own patterning, right? And feel where we're being triggered, what's going on. So one of the things that many metaphysicians will talk about is, like attracts like, right? And so there's that sense of, okay, I'm bringing in a lot of negative people in my life. And so what's going on in me that is negative, right? Sometimes people will talk about opposites attract, which is also true, right? Because it's sort of like this little, magnet, the plus and the minus magnet. But again, trying not to go too much into a belief system about positive or negative, good, bad. But the point being is that it's either going to be something that's in us that's attracting them because we're like that, or something that's the opposite of that, that's still attracting them to fill something within us. So I'm going to go into specifics. If you're finding that, for example, there's a lot of negative people in your life, it's really important to start to recognize where in me is this drawing them in. And in my video this morning or this afternoon, when I made about our, paying attention to what is going on in the body so it doesn't become disease, you can almost do like a body scan or an energy scan. It's like if you imagine someone, whoever this person is, that kind of triggers you, you can imagine them across from you and then start to feel what's going on in your body. What is being triggered, what is happening. And if it's in, let's say, the gut, it's like, oh, it's upsetting my stomach, I get really tight. It's like, okay, so what's going on in this area that has to do with my gut? Well, oftentimes that gut is going to be your will. So is this person taking away your power, or do you feel less empowered when you're with this person, right? So what we want to start to do is look at the patterning and then start to pull back. Now, the person is going to be the representation of what's going on in your system. The person is going to be the representation. Doesn't mean that you want to keep them in your life because, oh, it's just a representation. But the reality is, until you start to clear those up in you, it doesn't matter if this person walks away or if you get rid of them. If you haven't cleared the patterning up in yourself that keeps bringing in this type, boom, the next replacement will come. Does that make sense? All right, so I just want to be clear. At any time, you can raise your hand virtually or, wave. I can't really see the camera as well because of, the configuration. But again, you can raise your hand. I'll try to open up the screen so I could see a little better. Okay. So again, we're going through this general picture. We're going slightly in depth because we're covering one a month, but in the 1 hour, I'm going to be covering all of these little topics. So looking at patterns, starting to recognize the boundaries, starting to say, okay, I need to, start to see where I'm triggered and what's going on in me that keeps bringing in these types. And then how can I start to release these patterns in me and release the people? So it's the and both. So you're starting to shift the patterns inwardly so that you can have the inner strength and the boundaries that start to form as you are also releasing the people. So I'm going to go to a very, very specific example, which is, if you keep attracting alcoholics in your life, it's probably a good idea to go to Al-Anon and learn how to face and look at why is it that I keep attracting alcoholics, and start to take care of your own needs to be a codependent, right? That's a very specific approach. Okay. Now we're going to go on to environments and things that are so-called negative and so-called toxic and non-resonant. So this isn't about becoming a hermit. And the good thing about the pandemic is that it really did give us an opportunity to sort of just, for some of us, to not have anybody in our life that wasn't resonate. For some people, it meant that they were probably stuck in the house with someone who wasn't resonant. And that's really tricky, but it probably gave clarity into the relationship, which is, I don't want this, right? So it's, again, not about becoming hermits and not dealing with people. It's really recognizing I have, 24 hours in the day, and I spend X amount of hours sleeping. I spend X amount of hours eating. I spend X amount of hours doing whatever we do. And if I'm going to spend my time with people, I want them to be people that feel good to me. Or even neutral, like, maybe you go to an event that feels good and the people that are there are like, they're not why I'm here. I'm here for the event. I'm here because I want the whole. And the people, I can take or leave. It's no big deal. They're not bringing me down, in other words. But the idea is that you want to start shifting your attention and your awareness to those areas and situations that that resonate with you or that don't resonate. There's a real simple book, again, it's like everybody knows about the Marie Kondo's, sparking joy. That's excellent. Like, I'm not quite as minimalist as she is, but the essence of that, does it spark joy, is huge, right? And so many people had a hard time, figuring out if it sparks joy, because it's like, but I love this. I've had this since I was a child, and they can feel the joy in that. Others are, well, this was my mother's, and, she entrusted it to me, and I really couldn't give it away because it's a family heirloom. But meanwhile, you're carrying it and it's got dust and you don't really like it. It doesn't even feel good to you because it reminds you of some bad situation, right? So it can be really tricky, but if you do let your body feel it, you'll have a sense. Am I leaning forward? Does it feel yummy? Or am I kind of feeling tense and tight? But there's a book that was before the Marie Kondo craze, which was called, and it's still called, Clear Your Clutter with Feng Shui. And she basically, it's, not just about joy, but she even defines useful, because a lot of times we think everything's useful. Like, I might use this someday. And her little parameters were, if you don't use it at least once a year, like Christmas lights, then you don't need it, right? And some people will be like, oh, but if I get rid of this, I'm sure that it's going to come up. And that, she says, almost inevitably will happen, because it's your own fear and your own ego saying, see, I really need to hold on to this, right? So as soon as you get rid of something that you haven't used, let's say a fondue pot, I haven't used that since the 1970s, you get rid of it. And next thing you know, you're invited to a fondue party and you're like, I knew it, right? So it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's clutter, whether it's an environment, whether it's a situation. That the idea is that you want to start to recognize, where am I feeling disempowered, and where am I feeling negative and withdrawn, and where am I feeling like I want to lean in more, right? And again, neutrality is a fine place to be. There's nothing wrong with neutrality. It's sort of that place where you can sort of start to make some decisions. It offers some clarity by coming into neutrality. And, what I'm trying to invite here is a place of a spectrum, and not necessarily black and white, but being much more clear about the things that you really aren't resonating with who you are today. Okay. So one thing I will throw when it comes to environments, and I will be including some resources here, is things like television, right? And the nice thing is that today, most people are shifting to streaming. And the nice thing is that with streaming, they're being a little more specific about what they want versus just sort of what's on. And I think that's a new consciousness. So if you would rather have a whole bunch of streaming services and put out to your friends, hey, what's worth watching, then you can be more mindful and selective about what you prefer to watch versus just having whatever's on and fed to you. And I raised, 4 children without a television, and decided we finally did get a television when my husband was terminally ill and he couldn't do anything but lay in his hospital bed. And after he passed away, I kept the TV because I didn't care if it was just yelling at me. I didn't care. I just needed something in the house to make noise, right? So again, no judgment. It's looking at the whole. So I felt safer. I felt more like there was somebody in the house with me. I felt like my life wasn't going to, sweep into grief if I just had some noise in the background, right? So it's not turning everything in our lives into good, bad, right, wrong, should, shouldn't, but rather recognizing what is in my best interest right now, and what is it that makes me, that holds me more toward the being that I want to be, right? And so that's that piece of the whole. So I just want to throw that out there. So, so again, holding space for things that are resonant and trying to soften and release the ones that aren't. And that comes to letting go of old habits. Sometimes things like TV watching become habits, and that's really what it had become for me during those couple of years. But more than that, the habit of, self-talk, negative self-talk, or the habit of kind of like, the things that sort of chip away at who we are, right? So again, whatever your habits are, those are all going to be personal and your business. But one of the things that I will often do, my habit might be, I stay up later than I really feel good about doing. I stay up too late at night, right? And I start to feel exhausted the next day, and it just kind of feeds into the next day. And then I get in this little cycle where it just makes my days much more difficult, right? And it's not because, like, I have friends who have a hard time sleeping, for their own reasons. It's not about having a hard time sleeping. It's a habit of saying, this day is not going to get away from me. I have one more thing to do, or nobody can tell me it's time for my bed because I'm an adult. Whatever my story is that I get into starts to narrow in and pushes me into these habits. And so again, it's like being super compassionate with any changes we want to make. But some of the habits are also associated with how we treat others, how we talk to people, or the things that we don't do. Let's say the habits of how we eat, and how we take care of ourselves or not take care of ourselves. We live in a pretty neglectful culture that doesn't really honor self-care. And so it's letting go of the old habit of not caring for ourselves. So this entire talk is not at all shame, intended to be shame inducing, unfortunately, because we tend to feel already bad about ourselves, that we often can hear things as like, oh, I'm being seen. Oh, and that's not at all what this is about. This is really about saying, I'm wanting to shift into higher levels of more clear levels and higher vibrations of joy. And where am I perhaps, keeping myself covered a bit, and how can I start to release bits of that so that I don't feel so heavy, or I don't keep myself stuck, or, whatever that is. So any questions about anything or any comments so far? We have plenty of time. You can, again, raise your virtual hand. There's a little thing at the bottom where it says reaction, and then you can raise your hand that way, or you can just wave and unmute yourself. Okay. So now we're going on to face, heal wounds and trauma with compassion. Right now, you're probably noticing, if you're on any sort of, let's say, spiritual quest, or any kind of, have a lot of friends who are into personal growth and such, trauma is a really big topic right now. And as we start to move into who we are, and again, this is sort of releasing who we aren't, part of what we're releasing is that trauma. I started to see this pattern, 17 years ago, when I started doing readings and seeing people and seeing how awake, my clients were. What I saw was, rather than coming in as sort of, everyday people that, they're dealing with the first chakra, getting connected to the earth, and they work their way up into higher consciousness, which, yes, what I saw with a lot of my clients is they came in highly awake and highly open to other realms. And what they're trying to do is come into their bodies, into this life experience. And how they're doing that is from the upper chakras downward, right? And right now, collectively, we are at about this third chakra, about our will, coming into our power, coming into that sovereignty, that sense of self, and self in terms of the I am versus the I am, this bigger self, right? And we're also going to be coming down into the second chakra where the emotional body is, and into the first where that foundation is. And it's not going to feel so pretty for many of us, because that's where a lot of our trauma is. That's where a lot of our old stories are. That's where a lot of our wounds are, right? And yet, it's not like you have to get in there and roto-rooter it out and say, okay, we're done. It's a matter of really, it'll come up to us. We don't have to go searching for it. It'll show itself to us. Yes, it's a matter of having awareness, recognizing it, and then start to allow those to be healed with compassion. So it's not about the right, the wrong. It's about, wow, this is a very heavy load I'm carrying, and it hurts, and it's stopping me from moving forward. It's stopping me from having healthy relationships. It's stopping me from loving myself. How can I start to transform that? And I love the work of Gabor Mate. He's one of the few people that when I saw his, have you all heard of him? I can put his name in the, I'm trying to think of what his, anyway, I think it's called The Wisdom of Trauma is the name of his work. And he made this beautiful documentary video, whatever. And he's one of the few people that like sees life the way I see it. And it's like, oh my gosh, everything this man says is spot on. And I know someone who's going through his course, and she has experienced a ton of trauma in her life, and she's saying it's phenomenal. So anyway, whatever that may mean, whether it's through NLP, whether it's through hypnosis, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through, working deeply with, shamanic journeying, whatever it is that helps you start to recognize these wounds, and so that they can start to be transformed. And it doesn't mean that we have to fix everything, right? That we can have this sense of, I'm okay with having this little wound here still. And these are the ones that are needing to process, but I'm going to hold on to this one a little longer. And that's perfectly fine. And that's that piece that's about compassion and not making ourselves fix anything. It's this transformation, this loving ourselves. And if we think about it, we are love in action. We are love consciousness in human form. That's what we are. We are love. And I think if you've been here before, I probably said this at the other classes, because I say this all the time. Basically, what I see is that in order to be incarnated, not only did you have to agree to gravity and the heaviness of being human, the walking and, getting stuck to the earth and, jumping only so high and, there you are, and the density of bones and skin and all of that, you also had to agree to unworthiness, to the belief in unworthiness. Because it was like, hey, over on the earth plane, this is what they're playing out right now. They really believe that they're not worthy. So if you're going to participate, you have to agree to those terms. And you're like, okay, sure, no problem. And you sign and you jump in, and all of a sudden you're incarnating into a family that tried to make you believe you were unworthy. And then you go to a school system that really wanted you to believe that you were unworthy. And then you just keep hitting all these things so that you could really believe it. It's like, oh yeah, no, I totally believe it. And then the game or the transformation is to recognize your worthiness, right? It's to let go of all the patterns that make you somehow separate from who you are from your worthiness. And that is where the trauma becomes that lid that keeps you from that worthiness in many cases, right? It's like, I believe I deserved this, or I believe I'm so bad because my mother told me this every single day of my life, or whatever it was that happened. So if instead we remember that we are, going back to that very first class, which is, remember who you are, which is you are absolutely worthy. And, everything about you is perfection, right? Not perfect in this little, small p limited way. But if you start to recognize that you are perfection incarnate, and it's a matter of accepting it and remembering that you are love and that you are love consciousness, then it becomes transformed, right? So you're loving yourself back into who you are here to be, who you truly are. So is that giving you a picture there? All righty. And now the part that as we do all this work, when you start to separate from things, whether you chose them consciously or they got ripped out from underneath you, it's going to cause grief, right? It's like, wait a minute, I don't, feel connected to anybody at this point. My whole life is different than what I thought it was going to be. There's going to be grief. Or even those wounds, as they start to transform, it's going to bring up grief, right? And one of the things about grief is, especially after losing my husband, I seem to be paying attention more, but it's sort of like it's, the depth of your grief is absolutely related to the depth of your love, right? It's like, whether it's I love life so much and life cheated me and there's grief, or I had so much enthusiasm for a family being a close-knit family, and now it's not, there's going to be grief, right? So making room for grief doesn't necessarily mean wallowing it and having to, this and that and the other. And not to say that wallowing is a bad thing, but I'm not telling you that it has to look a certain way. In other words, it's creating that space that makes room for whatever shows up for you in terms of grief. And having, I would say, I don't want to say healthy as in, again, because every time there's a word, there's going to be an assumption of an opposite, but healthy ways to make room for that grief. So grief, for in other words, we don't necessarily want that to be eating ice cream in the middle of the night every single night for a year that makes us gain a lot of weight. And then we feel really, bloaty and awful and whatever else. So again, no judgment, but that may not be the healthiest expression. And at the same time, just like leaving my TV on for, I think I kept the TV for like an extra year. It's like, this is as good as my grief is going to get. Right? This is as good as it's going to get for me. There's too much going on. So this is the best I can do with this particular area. Right? So having that self-compassion again, as you work through different areas. One of the things, I don't know if anybody pays attention to what a lot of astrologers are saying, but basically I'm not an astrologer. My mother was really into astrology. So I was raised with everything, astrology. But they're really talking about the next, several years that we're really moving through a lot of it. This is what we're talking about right now, this, separate from unsupportive patterns. That's what we're doing collectively. So even if you don't consciously say, hey, I want this to, shift, I want things to be different, the foundation is being like shaken up, and it may even like disappear, right? Because we are really trying to make a huge quantum leap into a higher consciousness and in a higher way of being in the world. And so a lot of stuff is going to continue to happen that are going to feel completely shocking and scary and whatever else. And I'm not making prediction. I'm saying this is what a lot of astrologers are saying. But in other words, it's like the pandemic. We never would have guessed about that. And then look what it did. And yet we've had this experience, right? We've all experienced it in our own ways. But in essence, it really did shake a lot of people up to the place of, making room for grief. I had a family member who took his life during the pandemic, right? And so these are the type. I actually have another person who lost her daughter, but that was a little different situation. But nonetheless, she thought it was suicide, but it was actually an accidental overdose, but similar. It's just, the point being is that we are moving into these lower chakras, not just individually, but collectively, and things are being shaken up. And so there's going to be places where grief continues to hit and stir us up a bit. So starting to learn healthier ways to process and to be with our grief is going to serve us in the long run. All right, so I'm going to stop here and I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat the resources I was sharing, because each time I share resources, including articles, I've been, like I said, doing this for 17 years and I have articles, hundreds of articles actually. And there's a couple here that are on similar topics. I have so many videos, same thing. You can kind of just look up, you can do searches. So I have some videos and such. This time I didn't have any poems. Sometimes I'll include a poem or I'll include an audio, and I didn't have any radio interviews that were specific to this topic. And oftentimes I'll include those as well. So any questions about anything so far? Anything that you wanted me to review or go over or clarify? You can just unmute yourself or. And the nice thing is those links are all live. So anytime you click on them, they'll just open in a, what do you call it, somewhere. So any other questions? So again, it's a lot to cover in a short period of time. Go ahead, Janie.
I just want to make a comment. I don't know where everybody is on their spiritual journey, but what Veronica is talking about, it is so, so true. Because the first thing is you have to notice this stuff is happening. And then when you notice it, you go, man, I just don't feel good. Like when I'm around that person, what is it? And what can I do? And it's my mother. How am I going to handle this? And you just go, you just have to tell yourself, oh my gosh, that I have to take care of me, which is a whole different mindset. That women my age aren't, like that's a new thing to take care of yourself. But I had to do that. I had to separate myself from my mom and really, really limit conversations with her, because I started noticing it was making me feel really bad. Like I started paying attention to how I felt afterwards. And so and by the way, it improved. It took a few years, but it improved and now it's pretty good. But once you know what that feels like, then you can pick up on it when you're around other people. And it's so freeing. You will feel so much better. And then you start thinking about what she also said about, what part am I playing in this? Like how am I feeding into it as far as the relationships? And then also the thing about what habits are not serving me. And those things, I mean, I would say they were crucial to my spiritual evolvement. So you guys, I'm just telling the rest of you, don't take it lightly. Like this stuff works.
Well, and the other thing that I hate to say it this way, it's sort of like, if you don't choose to do it, if you've already agreed on a soul level that you're going to grow and you're going to experience this stuff, it'll happen to you. So you can wait for that, but it's not as comfortable. In fact, it's usually very uncomfortable if you wait and just wait and wait. It's sort of like, when you ignore the little mole, right? And you could have just had it removed rather than, because you were too scared to go to the doctor and you didn't want to deal with it, rather than, having it turn into something much bigger. But yes, absolutely. And I appreciate, that. One of the things that I have seen recently, just FYI, so many mother issues right now for people are coming up, a lot of mother issues. So again, it's not to blame. Trust me, father issues are going to come too. But a lot of people are really recognizing their patterning with their mother, because it's like, this is how we get our identity, right? And again, it's not to turn it into blame, but to recognize, okay, this isn't working for me. And the hard part when we come to these fundamental, spouses are tough, parents are even tougher, in the sense that there's going to be that grief piece that's like, but I want the mom that I want. But I want the dad that I want the parents that I deserve, right? It's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I just happened to be born. And how come I got these crappy parents, or how come I got right? And it's so painful to have that, that feeling and that, I'll call it that belief, because it's not really anything that we have done wrong, but the belief is that something's wrong with me, right? That's that hooks in. And so if we believe something's wrong with us, we still outwardly, this is the patterning. You can feel it almost as soon as I speak about it, oftentimes in that third chakra. It's like, well, how do I find that I'm okay? And it has to come from mom and dad. It has to come from them, right? And I'm eventually going to get that love, and then I'll be okay. And sadly, that rarely happens, because rarely is a parent going to have a full, transformation and go, gee, everything I did was wrong. I'm sorry I treated you this way. Let me change it all now and treat you the way you want to be treated, right? It just, not to say it doesn't happen, but it's you can't hold your breath for that one. One of the things with my husband, that his parents were really nice people. So again, it's not about good, bad, right, wrong, but he recognized how his mom would undermine him with little tiny things, little things that just made him feel bad. And then it's like, no wonder why I feel bad about myself, and just those little, like she said one time, he fixed something and he was a carpenter, just like his dad. And she's like, oh, that's beautiful. Like one of those like surprises, and then I didn't know you did such good work. And he's like, what do you think? I've been doing shitty work all this time? I mean, it was just one of those like little tiny things that's just like, geez, mom, really? But again, it's really out of her. And if you watch her patterning, she wouldn't, like, if she would bake and she mix something or whatever, she'd go, oh, I'm just so stupid. I mean, she would literally say these words out loud, right? And so who was she doubting? Was it herself? Was it the world? How did that show up? So again, it is subtle sometimes, and sometimes it's not so subtle. And oftentimes it's what's that trigger? What's holding us and keeping us trapped? So any other questions or comments? We still have a couple of minutes here. So one of the questions that's really hard to ask yourself when you're in a situation, oftentimes with people, but in general, hold old habits, holding on to your trauma, staying in a negative environment, the question that can kind of start to make you be a little more honest is, what is the payoff for me? What is the payoff for me staying in this situation? What am I getting from it? Right? Because then we can start to recognize there is something in it for us. And I don't mean it again in like, oh, I'm in an abusive relationship and he's a really nice guy. I'm not talking about that. It's, what does it mean if I were to disconnect? If somebody's verbally abusive, what makes me stay? What is making me stay? What is the payoff? Well, I don't have to take responsibility for my own actions. I can blame my whole life on this person being my trap, right? Because that feels so good, so good. And I tell you this from absolute experience. My husband and I were together for 31 years. And for 6 years of those, we separated, and he was just off the deep end, did, struggle with mental illness, depression, blah, blah, blah. They changed his medication. He went all over the map with it. And during that time, oh my gosh, it felt so good to say what a rotten person he was, because it was like, he gets to be the bad guy and everybody saw it. It's like, yay, I get to, but I did it in ways where I could laugh about it with my friends, because I knew I had, unfortunately, I have this observer that would see me doing this. I'm like, oh, come on, but I could at least played it out a bit, going, come on, this is my life having drama here, and poor me. But the reality was I didn't stay and I didn't keep him. It was like, you're moving out until you get your shit together. You are not going to live in this house. And so then that's when I went deeper into my work. Right. And so, yeah, I can go rah, 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 and complain, but it was really about, the complaint was more of the vent, get it off, my chest. But it was also what led me deeper into even more work that says, okay, we've been together 15 years. Everything was going well. I don't understand how this happened now, but what's going on in me that is contributing to this? Because it was too easy to say, but he just went off the deep end. This happened to him. Yes, that was absolutely what happened. And I was his wife and we had 4 children. So there had to be some part that I was playing. I won't say that I never figured out and saying it didn't matter what it was in terms of the playing. It was, what am I going to do to heal? Period. His illness meant I needed to heal, to me, right? And so he was only responsible for himself. And I could say, you can't live in this household during this time, but I'm still responsible for doing my inner work, right? So that whatever it is that's contributing isn't feeding it, right? So really, really tricky. So when we can get to these places and being self-compassionate and take responsibility, which is what we often most want to avoid, then that becomes the driver toward that healing, toward the next step. And we are just about at a close. I want to make sure there weren't any other questions or comments before we finish. The video does take a little bit of time to process. And once it is, what I do is I put it up on YouTube. Let me go ahead and go to the next screen. So next month on August 22nd is key element number 8. And so this is sort of the opposite of or the complement, I should say, of what we're doing tonight. And tonight was all about separate from unsupportive patterns. And next month is going to be, how do you support yourself and surround yourself with positive? So it's getting rid of the things that aren't working and moving into the things that you do want. Again, these are free. It's fine to sign up on Meetup. It's almost better to do it through my website, just because you get a reminder. I happen to send a reminder this time through Meetup because I changed the passcode, but with the online, you get the automatic reminder. And so basically that's it. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And like I said, it does take a little bit of time for this to process, and I will put it up on my website when it's done. So every month I have all the resources that are there. You can, again, go to I think I will look, see if I can I'll put it in there one more time for those of you who may have missed that 12 key elements website link. And that shows all the other videos. And each class has been 1 hour. And in them includes all the resources. So plenty of articles and audios and videos that complement the content for each one. And it was a pleasure. I'm glad that this worked out. I'm glad that I did this whole different approach, which had the waiting room, so I didn't have to deal with anybody Zoom bombing this time around. But it was a good connection with all of you. So I'd be happy to stay and answer any questions if you wanted to ask them offline. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.